The Mount of Mayhem update is dropping soon and will absolutely be wrecking chaos on the world with tons of new mobs and weapons to fight with. Hey yo, I'm Creato, and this drop really does have the potential to be the most chaotic drop in history. So please hit subscribe if you're excited for the Mounts of Mayhem drop. Alright, so we got some hot new mobs that live in the desert, but how about we cool things down and add in some frozen mobs in the snowy biomes? And all the frozen mobs would also have some icy powers and would do slowness in all their attacks, which could make running away a bit harder with the frozen skeletons sniping you down with slowness arrows, especially if you face off against a polar jockey, which is a pretty angry polar bear controlled by a frozen zombie. But over in the jungle, you'll also find some venomous mobs, which are the meanest mobs that attack with poison in each hit. And you'll have to watch your step around here since the mobs will camouflage perfectly with all the leaves and vines in the jungle. Cause if you let your guard down for even a second, the next thing you know, a creeper's dropping down with a poisonous blast out of nowhere. And on rare chances, you could even find a slime jockey with a venomous creeper on top that sneaks up and explodes with the poison effect sticking around after. But down in the ocean, you could also find some more mobs to swim around with the Nautilus, like the jellyfish, which are friendly mobs that spawn in the coral reef biome. And jellyfish come in tons of different colors and sizes, so there'll always be something fun to find. But they aren't just for show, even though they're really nice to look at, since you can craft a net to catch the jellyfish, and then get some jellyfish jam that matches the color of the jellyfish you caught. Exactly the way it works for real, of course. And after you've caught enough jellyfish jam, you could craft it into jelly blocks, which work like slime blocks, except that the jelly blocks only stick to other jelly blocks of the same color, which makes them pretty useful for moving blocks without having to worry about the jelly getting all jammed up with itself. And if you keep swimming around, you'll also find some warm squids, which, like the name suggests, spawn in the warmer parts of the ocean. And warm squids act like normal squids, but with warmer shades instead, which is the same as cold squids that spawn in the icy parts of the ocean with their cooler colors to match the biome. This way, the squids get the same love as the other mobs with their warm and cold variants. That's enough love for the squids, since you could hunt them down to get some calamari, which you could cook up in case you're looking for something besides the same old regular fish. But if you really do like the squids, then you could also grab them in a bucket to move them around more easily for any sort of aquarium build. But the best kind of squids are found a little bit deeper in the ocean. No, not that kind of squid, since you can head down to a deep ocean cave where you'll be greeted by some crystal squids. And these crystal squids are even shinier than glow squids, since the crystal squids spawn in lots of different colors with sparkles all around them. And those sparkles don't just make the crystal squids look really cool, since it also holds the power inside the crystal squids. Cause if you were to punch a crystal squid, then you might get some crystal shards, which all have some magical abilities depending on the crystal shard color, since each crystal shard gives a different potion effect when consumed, like the green crystal shard that gives you jump boost to bounce around, or the red crystal shard that gives strength to knock out the rest of the crystal squids. And I know crunching on crystals probably doesn't sound like the best idea to try, but hey, it's from the crystal squids, who I definitely trust way more than the glow squids over there. But if having magical powers to save the world isn't really your thing, then you can also craft the crystal shards into some new crystal lamps to match the crystal squids, because who wouldn't want to be surrounded by tons of colorful lights all the time? But you might actually want to use some new weapons, like daggers, which would be like a mini version of swords that would deal slightly less damage but would be able to attack much faster than a sword, which makes them pretty useful for getting lots of quick hits on mobs, which can start to add up in just a few short seconds. Plus, the dagger would also take one less item to craft than a sword, which could make the difference between having something to attack with or not, depending on how much bank you got stashed up. But if the quick jabs with the dagger aren't enough damage, then you could also throw it to cause some damage from a distance. Just make sure to not miss, cause, well, that's your dagger gone now. But you won't need to worry about bad aim if you've got a longsword, since it's got much further reach, which lets you attack from a further distance than normal. And the longsword would also do more damage than a regular sword, but would attack at a slightly slower speed. And since the longsword has more reach on it, that means it can be used to your advantage for attacking enemies from a distance where they can't get to you. How's it feel now, huh, zombies? But just keep in mind, you would need to cough up a bit more items to make a long sword, which seems like a pretty fair trade for the extra reach if you ask me. And you can also instead craft a hand axe, which has the same damage and attack speed as a sword, but can also be thrown as well. That means you can pretty much use it the same as a sword, but with the surprise ability to throw it whenever you want, since I bet the mobs will never see that one coming. Or if you've got the XP for it, then you can just enchant the hand axe with loyalty so that it would return back after throwing it. But this might be a bit of a risk when against ranged mobs, since you'd have to actually throw your hand axe to get a hit on the mob, which kind of makes the hand axe a bit more similar to a trident instead of a sword, but with the main difference being that the hand axe is actually craftable, which makes it much easier to get than putting the entire drowned species to extinction. But if you're looking for the most bang for your buck, then you can craft yourself a battle axe, which has the beefiest damage with it doing even more damage than a netherite sword, but with the drawback being its slower attack speed. Since you can use the battle axe to get a big hit on an enemy, but would then need to wait for it to be ready to attack again. And this makes it really useful for those moments where you get get the chance to get a good hit, which would be pretty devastating for anything that gets in the way of your battle axe. And all these weapons would also work with the usual enchantments you know, like sharpness and fire aspect, so you can really push them to their limits, with each one having its use case depending on the moment you need it. And you'll definitely be needing to use your best weapon, since you could find an ocean shrine sitting at the bottom of the ocean, which looks peaceful at first, but once you get close to it, you'll summon a Drowner, which is a new 2-in-1 boss mob that starts off with the Drowner on top controlling the deepwater piranha. And the Drowner will immediately start throwing tridents, and can even summon ghost tridents. But you'll need to take out the piranha first, because without it, the Drowner can't move around as fast. And once you take out the piranha, it'll drop some coral fragments, which you should collect for later. Because now with the Drowner by itself, you get into the second phase of the fight where the Drowner regenerates health with the water, which means you'll need to lure it out and continue the fight on land. And the Drowner also gets much stronger in the second phase, since once it's at half health, it'll get 2 new attacks, with the dash attack dealing quick damage 3 times in a row, and the spin attack that does 360 area damage, in addition to its original trident attacks as well. But once the Drowner finally goes down, it'll drop some coral ingots, which you use to craft a coral armor set that's as tough as netherite and even gives both water breathing and dolphin's grace with a full set on. But you can take this further by combining the coral helmet with the fragments you got from the piranha earlier to add a bonus effect to your helmet, like the red coral fragment, which adds the strength effect, and the yellow coral fragment, which gives you haste. But for the ultimate upgrade, you can combine the coral ingots with the fragments to make an ancient coral spear, which lets you do some of the same attacks as the Drowner, while also fitting perfectly with this drop as a new weapon for both water and land-based combat. But you'll want to stay in the water since there's also lobsters you can find on the seafloor, which only spawn in a few different variants, but are mostly neutral mobs that only attack if you hit them first. But they're not really the biggest threat, and will even drop a lobster tail after defeated, which you should hold on to for later, since you'll also find some octopus swimming around in warm oceans, which have a special camouflage ability to blend in with the blocks around them, which can make them a bit tricky to find at times. But the octopus are also able to camouflage into some mobs like a guardian or pufferfish, and after taming them with some of those lobster tails you got earlier, they will now follow you around and even use their camouflage ability to help you with battles. Cause now, when the octopus is attacking while camouflaged as a mob, it can also use the same attacks as the mob, which can both be really useful as you continue fighting underwater. And hey, if you're looking for more items that could have some specific uses, then you can also craft some unique armor pieces that give different buffs for each armor piece, like the skull helmet that gives you a camouflage ability when wearing it, which lets you sneak past hostile mobs without them even noticing. And this can be really useful since you wouldn't have to deal with any more zombie bites or arrows flying around. But the moment you attack any of them, well, then they'll finally realize what's going on and return the hits. And mobs can be too much to deal with sometimes. So if that's not your thing, then you can craft a glowstone helmet instead, which gives you night vision while wearing it. And this doesn't have to be for just finding mobs easier, since you could also use it in giant caves to see better without having to place down any torches. But just remember that even though everything looks all nice and bright, it's actually still dark and will keep spawning mobs everywhere. But as long as you're careful enough, you should be able to make your way around caves and grab all the ores before any mobs find you. Just make sure to watch out for any lava pools that might be lurking around any corners. Well, only until you make yourself a lava chestplate, since with this, you'll be completely immune to any sort of fire damage, which is extra useful in somewhere like the Nether that's pretty much always on fire, since the lava chestplate will protect you from any sort of blaze or ghast attacks, making them not as much of a threat anymore. And the entire time, you'll also be rocking this pretty fire chestplate as well, which I think is more than enough a reason to wear it at all times. But back in the overworld, you won't have to worry anymore about random attacks from mobs or lava dripping down, which makes it the perfect time to craft some slime boots, so you can just jump around without a care in the world, as long as there's no unexpected cliffs nearby. Cause the slime boots would give you jump boost while wearing them, which would help you out in all sorts of places, since it make getting around tricky terrain a lot easier without having to deal with all the trees and whatever else might be in the way. But if you head over to the shore for a bit, then you'll find some seals laying around on the sand, which don't really like moving around much, unless you give them some cod so they can go out and search for treasure in the ocean floor. But the seals aren't always so lucky, since sometimes all they'll find is just random ocean junk like coral or kelp. But there is a chance that they'll find other items that give a clue to some mobs hiding further in the ocean. Because if you swim further below the surface, you'll find a bull shark, which you should probably keep some distance from, since they'll start to bite if you get too close to them. But if you're brave enough, you could try to get closer to feed it with a fish bucket to get the jaws effect, which kind of turns you into the bull shark, since with the effect, every mob you hit will take bleeding damage after hitting them. But the bull shark isn't the only shark in the ocean, since there's also a mako shark which swims much faster and even does slightly more damage. But the mako shark is completely neutral and won't attack unless you attack first, and you can also feed it too with a fish bucket, which will give you the frenzy effect that increases your swimming speed by a crazy amount for a few seconds, which could be insanely useful in case you're trying to swim as fast as the mako shark. But not all sharks want to bite your face off, since there's also the nurse shark, which is much more friendly and can even be tamed with some cod, which makes it follow you around and sometimes even give regeneration as you're swimming close together. But there are still ways to protect yourself from other types of damage, since with new shield types you can finally upgrade your shield with different materials like the rest of the tools. And each shield level would also have more protection until you reach reach the toughest shield made from netherite, which also has the bonus ability of preventing all damage from fire, except for lava, that still burns. And another item that could also get an upgrade is the good old classic bow, because with more levels for the bow, that means it would get more durability to last longer before needing to be repaired. But who cares about durability when you use a mending bow, right? Because the main difference between all the bows is that each one is able to charge up the arrow faster so you can snipe off a mob before it gets away. But the bows would also become heavier as they upgrade, which means it would further decrease your movement speed while the arrow is fully loaded. But all the real damage comes from the upgraded arrows that go all the way from wood to netherite. And you'll want to make sure to not miss any of your shots, because well, that's your hard-earned diamond flying right into a tree. But if spending diamonds on arrows isn't worth it, then you can instead use some different types of arrows with special abilities, like the ender pearl arrow, which isn't really for damage, since it lets you throw an ender pearl through an arrow way further than an ender pearl alone, which you could use to deal with a mob right in its face. Or you can also craft a blaze arrow, which ignites anything it hits without needing the flame enchantment. But this isn't just for mobs, since the blaze arrow also starts a fire where it lands, which might end up burning down an entire forest if you keep hitting the trees. But my favorite arrow has to be the explosive arrow, which takes the power of a TNT block and sends it flying through the air until it lands in a fiery crash. Cause with this arrow, you'll easily be able to snipe off a mob from afar without it ever knowing what happened. But with so many types of arrows, you're gonna need some way to store them all, which is exactly what a quiver is for, since it lets you store up to 4 stacks of arrows, and even wear them on your back like the pro archer you are now, right? But with the quiver equipped, you can also swap through the arrows while holding up your bow, so you can make sure to not use a harming arrow on a zombie anymore. And you could even dye your quiver any color you want to really make it your own. But my attention span ran out now, and arrows are kinda boring. Cause for a bit more action, you could head down to the deep ocean, since the deepest part of the ocean is where you'll find the axodile. And you definitely don't want to mess with this guy, because the axodile is a powerful shark variant that lurks close to the sea floor, but will still follow you out if you enter its territory. And you'll need to have some pretty tough gear, since the axodile has a ton of health with lots of damage in each bite. And you can try to swim away, but even on land you won't be safe, since the axodile also breaks the ice you're standing on to try and get you to fall back in the water. Yeah, sounds like a rough fight, but if you defeat the axodile, then it will drop some axa leather, which you could combine with some turtle scutes to make an axoscute. And these axoscutes are really tough, and even let you craft a jagged armor set that gives the same protection the axodile had. And it'll also give you infinite water breathing with the full set, which you might need if you decide to stay in the deep ocean, because you'll also find the thrasher here lurking around in the deep frozen oceans. And the thrasher is just as terrifying, but it's also completely blind, which means it won't attack you at first, but instead send out some sonar waves, which it uses to detect anything in the way, and then charge towards it to attack. And you better hope you don't get in the way of the thrasher, because it's got giant fangs that chomp down on its prey, making it hard to escape its grip. But if you're able to get some quick hits on the thrasher, then it'll let you go. Well, that is until it decides to come back for more. But if you're able to take down a thrasher before becoming its lunch, then it'll drop some of its teeth, which you can use to craft a new thrasher tooth block set that also comes with a really bright thrasher lantern to light up even the darkest of caves, which is exactly the kind of place where you'll find an anglerfish quietly roaming around the deep ocean caves. But don't fall for the light, because it might look all nice and shiny, but as soon as you get close to it, the anglerfish will immediately start attacking. And the anglerfish has a pretty mean bite that also gives poison after each attack, which only makes it harder to get away since you'll have to deal with the poison while trying to find your way out the cave. But if you're able to take down an anglerfish, then it'll drop some of its fins and fangs, which you should quickly collect and take back up to the surface, because you can use these items to craft an angler armor set, which is a bit different from the other armor types, since it'll give you around the same protection amount as diamond, but with the extra bonus of increased swimming speed and the ability to poison any mob that attacks you, which might make some mobs think twice before starting a fight when you have this armor set on. And another perfect combo is the Elder Trident, which combines the power of an Elder Guardian with a trident, because now you'll get an Elder Guardian eye after taking down one of them in the Ocean Monument. And you can then take this to a smithing table and add it to a trident to get your new and improved Elder Trident. And just like the Elder Guardian laser attack that tracks you down, the Elder Trident will also follow and strike mobs if you throw it close enough, which means you don't need to get a direct hit anymore, since the Elder Trident can pretty much fix your aim for you. But the Elder Trident also gains more power as you start to enchant it, because with loyalty, it'll be able to return the items dropped by mobs straight to your inventory, which saves the effort of having to walk all the way just to pick up the items. But the best enchant for the Elder Trident has to be Riptide, because it will also send out up to 3 tridents each time you use the Riptide dash, depending on the enchantment level. And this pretty much means you'll get a ton of items without any effort, since the Elder Tridents will attack mobs and bring back all their loot for you while you keep on dashing around the place. And hey, if you're going to be doing all that dashing, then you might want to carry around some totems in case you run into anything that puts up a fight, because with some new types of totems, you'll have more options to choose from based on what type of effect you want to get. And these totems would use the powers of different mobs to give you an effect that matches the mob, like the Exploding Totem, which you get by surrounding a regular totem with gunpowder to use the creeper's ability to your advantage. And this means that when the totem gets activated, it'll explode right where you are to blast away any mobs in the way. But don't worry, since the explosion won't even cause a single scratch to you, but will definitely send mobs flying away. the way. But if you don't want to cause an explosion, then you could instead use a teleporting totem, which teleports you back to your spawn when the totem activates. And this pretty much means that the teleporting totem will be guaranteed to get you out of a fight by taking you back to safety. And honestly, I could think of all sorts of awkward situations where I could have used this totem myself. But you could also use a ghastly totem, which will give you the levitation effect to send you up to the clouds. Well, at least for a couple seconds anyway. Which might be useful in case you fall off a cliff again to just float right back up to where you were before gravity got in the way. But the final totem you could use is the rotting totem, which works much better than it sounds, since when activated it'll turn you undead just like the zombies. Which means that any damage you take will actually heal you. And this would make all the mobs kind of friendly in a way, since their attacks would feel more like hugs now that each one heals you back up. But remember, you're undead now, which means that anything that would normally heal you would actually cause damage now. So no more golden apples for now, I guess. And you might want to stock up on some of those totems. Because another mob ready to fight is the giant squid, which spawns in deep oceans but will only attack you if you hit first. But the giant squid won't hesitate to fight other mobs like guardians, since the giant squid will use its tentacles to pull mobs closer to it, which might be hard to get out of if you decide to start up a fight with the giant squid. But if you're trying to get away, then all you need to do is return back to the surface, since the giant squid starts to lose health when too close to the top, and will try to avoid it at all costs. But the giant squid might struggle getting away from the cachalot whale, since it's a giant whale type also found in the deep ocean. And the cachalot whale is also neutral and prefers not to get in a fight if it doesn't have to. But beware, since the cachalot whale will still crush into ice and destroy any that's in its way, which would be a pretty bad time to be sailing a boat nearby. And the cachalot whale will also occasionally use its echolocation ability to search for any mobs. And if it does find any, then it will spare nothing and go straight for it no matter the distance. But despite all the space under the ocean, it turns out it isn't actually big enough for both the giant squid and cachalot whale. Since if these two giants see each other, then they'll battle it out until there's only one of them left. And you'll definitely want to keep your distance from this, since the mob that wins the fight will determine which item will be dropped. Because if the cachalot whale defeats the giant squid, then it'll drop some lost tentacles, which you can craft together with a crossbow and some copper to make a grappling squawk, which lets you safely get down from a high area without any risk. But if the giant squid defeats the cachalot whale, then it'll drop a cachalot tooth, which you can combine with iron ingots to craft an echolocator, which lets you send echo waves to help you find the nearest cave if there's one close by. But the best way to get around would be with a grappling hook, which lets you swing around blocks without having to move a muscle, since you can craft the grappling hook with some copper and iron ingots and then activate it to send it flying through the air. And the grappling hook can extend pretty far and will grab onto any block it hits, which will then pull you towards the block without you needing to do anything. And this also kind of works like being on a lead. Well, from a mob's perspective anyway, since while the hook is pulling you toward a block, you can swing around and even move any way you want, which makes the grappling hook really useful for moving up lots of blocks. But just make sure to not try the same thing going down, since fall damage still exists and will hit pretty hard on impact. Which is also true for dynamite sticks that you can toss at mobs that have been getting in your way, since you can craft a dynamite stick from the same items as TNT, along with a few others for good measure. And for legal reasons, you didn't learn this from me, okay? But the dynamite stick is actually perfectly harmless on its own, since you'll also need a flint and steel in your offhand to ignite and throw it. And oh man, you definitely won't want to be where the dynamite stick lands, because this thing really does come crashing down in a bang. Pretty cool, huh? But how about tossing TNT from a happy ghast instead of doing it yourself? That way you can still say your hands are clean, because you would be able to drop down TNT from the happy ghast with it falling straight to the ground. Or you can also use fire charges to send out a fireball like the normal ghasts from the nether. And this one could actually change direction depending which way you're facing, because just look at this happy gas powered war machine. I mean, it really doesn't get any cooler than that. But hold your fire, because on the shores you'll find crabs chilling in the mangrove swamps. And you might remember this little guy, but now he's finally here and can be bred with some kelp. And crabs kind of work like turtles in a way, since crabs will also lay eggs on mud. And after some time has passed, the eggs will hatch and out pops a baby crab. And you could either sit around and wait for it to grow up, or just speed it up with some kelp, because once the baby crab grows up, it'll drop a crab claw, which is exactly what you'll want from the crab, since you can use the claw in your offhand to extend your reach for building. And if you keep looking around the shore, you'll also find some hermit crabs on beaches, which are a different type of crab that have a shell on them. And you can breed the hermit crabs with seagrass to make a baby hermit crab. And you'll have to cover its eyes real quick, because if one of the big hermit crabs, well, cracks I guess, then it'll drop some shell pieces, as well as some meat, which you can cook up and eat. Just not in front of the babies, please. And once you have 5 shell pieces, then you can craft a hermit crab shell helmet, which you can equip and then sneak to get the resistance effect, which seems pretty helpful for keeping the old noggin nice and safe. And hey, speaking of useful, across the shore you'll find some penguins on a stony shore, which is probably another familiar face, since the penguins spawn in 2 variants for you to find. And penguins really like cod, because you can feed them some and then they'll follow you around. And if you head to a boat, they'll also follow you into the water and give your boat a pretty nice speed boost. But penguins kind of get tired after lots of swimming, so just make sure to feed them with plenty more fish. And you'll definitely have no problem finding tons of fish, because there's also lots of new fish types in all parts of the water. Because now fish have been split into 2 groups, with the freshwater fish like catfish and bass spawning in rivers, rivers, and the saltwater fish like the sailfish and tuna spawning in the oceans, which really helps give more life to all the oceans and river biomes. But if you want even more options in your attacks, then you could also add some potion effects to your sword, which means that each hit with your sword would also give the same effect you added to the mob you hit. But you would first need to enchant your sword with the new potion load enchantment, and then load it up with the potion you want in your offhand. And the amount of potion hits you get would match the amount of potion bottles you put into your sword. But you would also get a bonus potion hit on your sword with a higher enchantment level. And when combined with the usual enchantments like fire aspect and sharpness, you could do some serious damage to mobs based on the enchant potion combo you go with. Cause I don't know about you, but there's nothing better than having tons of new attack options to go out and wreck everything in the way.